Although I'm not doing it. So over to you. Would you like the microphone? I thought it was a mistake.
Sorry to shortchange you all, and that very big company me. But first of all, good evening, everybody, both here in the hall and, of course, online. And welcome to Pathways to Peace. This is our first event. It's a Justice for Palestinians and Peaceful initiative. And as I say, the first of the series of Pathways to Peace, where we hope to continue to have speakers as superb as he's going to be tonight. My name is Barclay Lane, and I'm a facilitator for this evening. It's a privilege to welcome you and an honour to introduce our speakers. Peace and justice have not been more urgently required in Gaza, Palestine, and the Middle East since the Second World War. We witness the brutal slaughter in Gaza and the deadly oppression in the West Bank and Jerusalem daily. It is with this in mind that we have an astonishing panel of speakers for you tonight. Professor Nick Maynard, nearest to me, specialises in general and upper GI surgery. I'm guessing that's gastrointestinal? He's an incredible human being who has recently returned from Gaza, where he's been doing what he can to save lives. You want to hear the truth? You want to hear the truth? You can hear from him. I've heard him speak before. Spectacular speaker. Sorry, I've given you something to butt to there. Okay. Tayab Ali, on the far end, is the director of the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians. He and the ICJP have brought a criminal complaint against the British government and individual senior ministers for the crimes of willfully causing suffering and starvation as a weapon of war. Not before time. Michael Mansfield is our moderator. He'll be a little bit more than moderator tonight. He's promised to intervene. I'm really welcome that. He's rightly known to many of us as an internationally renowned human rights lawyer. He's fought for justice in the Middle East for decades. If anyone knows what they're talking about, it's him. I'm very pleased to have them all here tonight, of course. Before we start, a quick note to all our Zoom participants. Please keep your video off and unmute your voice. Please type any questions you may have in the chat box. Type questions in capitals so we notice it. If you have any problems with the connection, strongly recommend that you try refreshing your browser. That usually seems to correct issues. With that, it's time for me to hand over to Michael. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Just waiting one or two still coming in. I'm not going to say anything now at this minute because there are two other speakers, one of whom's travelled quite a long way to be here. So I think it's more important that they speak first, and then maybe at the end of that I'll say a little bit. If I don't, then there'll be Q&A with you, anything you want to ask. And so at that point, sorry, is this me or is it there? No. And maybe at that point, towards the end, I'll have a little bit to say about my own experiences in the light of what you will be hearing. So I think there's no particular order, but do we always start on my right or on my left? Depends on your political stance. However, I think mine is not this way, but let's start with Nick, who's sitting, he won't mind me, who's sitting on my right. Do you need these?
I do, thank you. I need to load my talk up, don't I? So I need, we had it up there, didn't we? While we're loading that up, I want to show you my scarf, which is my most prized Palestinian possession. It was given to me by the president of the Islamic University of Gaza on one of the many trips I've been taking out there since 2010. The Islamic University of Gaza has, of course, been destroyed now, and you won't be able to get this again, I suspect, for many years, but it's a very, very prized possession. So hopefully, coming up any second now.
Microsoft is even
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I'm going to wander around and move the slides forward as I speak. I just want to show you those two photos. I don't know if anyone saw the world's press photography competition the other day in London. It was magnificent. The one on the right is a poor lady holding her dead niece in Gaza, and that won first prize. The bottom picture is someone walking through Khan Yunis, which is a city I know very well. My Gazan friends over there know very well in its destroyed state. That was the runner-up prize. I'm going to start off by giving you a CNN quote of the day from March the 22nd. I was in the US at the time doing some advocacy for Gaza. I spent time at the United Nations and in DC with some politicians. And I was with Dr. Tayab Ali, who's a good friend of mine. He's an emergency physician in Chicago. And he'd been out in Gaza at the same time as me over Christmas and New Year. And we both did a lot of media interviews out there. And he was interviewed by CNN. And they used his answer to their first question as their quote of the day. And he was asked, what is it like in Gaza at the moment? And his answer was, it is apocalyptic. It was horrific. It was miserable. And that really sums up what is going on in Gaza at the moment. I'm going to talk about normal Gaza to start with, because I want you to understand what Gaza was like before October the 7th. I say normal because it became normal to me. It became normal to all my Gazan friends and relatives over there, but it's not normal by anyone else's standards at all. It's very small Gaza. It's 25 miles long. There used to be a Gaza marathon, which I think was last run 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I don't know. I know someone who ran it once. But it's only 360 square kilometres. It's extremely densely populated, more than 2.2 million people, high unemployment, and a median age of 17, which means half the population of children, which perhaps helps you understand why nearly over 40, or begins to understand why 14,000 children have been killed in the last 7 months. High poverty is, of course, been occupied by Israel since 1967 and has been blockaded for the last 16 years, and it's been variously called the large prison and concentration camp. Now, the healthcare services, the provision of healthcare has always been very challenging in Gaza for many reasons, and there have been many reasons why there's been poor health in Gaza, and I'm going to talk about social and medical reasons. Of course, we're going to talk about the impact of violent conflict. But it's very important to recognise that the World Health Organization definition of health for nations, an essential criterion for that is human security. And of course, that is something that has not existed for Palestinians for many years. So they're, right from the word go, they're going to struggle to be a healthy population. So what are the social determinants? Well, the borders are closed. The economy has been largely disabled by Israeli control for many years. It's an occupation under military control. Extreme poverty, extreme unemployment. We've heard about that already. Continuing food insecurity. I'm going to talk quite a bit about the effects of malnutrition, which I think is a huge danger and a huge cause of death at the moment in Gaza. But before October the 7th, there's always been food insecurity there. Poor water availability, quality, very poor sanitation often, inability to travel, and real energy and fuel insecurity with recurrent power cuts to the extent that often, again, we're talking about normal Gaza, pre-October the 7th, often electricity only for 3-4 days at a time. What about medical constraints on their healthcare system? A chronic shortage of drugs, medicines, surgical disposables, surgical instruments. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work I've done there previously operating out there in normal Gaza, which again is still very challenging. Malnutrition, we keep coming back to that. Inadequate capacity, both in terms of personnel, healthcare workers, and infrastructure. Outdated medical equipment, denial of treatment referrals. There's a continuing need for Gazans to be able to leave Gaza for medical care. For example, I'm a cancer surgeon. For example, there's no radiotherapy facilities in Gaza at all. So if someone needs radiotherapy, they have to leave, or they have to apply for permission to leave. And they may go to the West Bank, then they go to Jordan. So 33% of requests for medical transfer out are denied by the Israeli government. We're talking about before October the 7th. And even if they're allowed to go out, 62% of requests for companions to go with them are denied. And that means children may well go to the West Bank for radiotherapy for their brain tumour without any parents going out with them, without anyone going with them. So this is again before October the 7th. Lack of specialists, great difficulty for anyone to get out and train, and great difficulty for people to go in and train them. And of course, multiple disabilities made much, much worse by the deliberate targeting of Gazan youth's limbs during the Grand March of Return since 2018. A deliberate targeting of the legs, the kneecaps, to destroy their legs, to make them disabled. Now, the healthcare challenges in Gaza is not new. This was an emergency statement released by MAP in 2018, saying that the total collapse of Gaza healthcare was imminent at that stage. So this has been a recurring theme for many, many years, but of course is extreme at the moment. I mentioned Islamic University of Gaza. I've been going out since 2010. This is me and a bunch of colleagues from Oxford who ENAS over there will recognise. And we go out, I take out a team of surgeons, obstetricians, paediatricians, physicians, and we teach medical students. We have done since 2010. We teach them at the bedside, how to examine patients, how to develop clinical skills. We have a whole system of case scenario stations where we teach them resuscitation of critically ill, basic surgical skills. And we've been doing that yearly since 2010. Separate to that, I've also been going out with medical aid to Palestinians. I'm going to plug MAP throughout this talk, and I'm going to show you the QR code after this, so you can photograph it and donate money to them, because they're a wonderful, wonderful charity. But I've been going out with MAP to help develop their cancer surgical services over recent years, to carry out major stomach cancer surgery, to help develop advanced keyhole or laparoscopic surgery, and to organise their cancer services. October the 14th, we had set up, it was cancelled for obvious reasons, we had arranged our first online multidisciplinary team meeting for upper GI cancer between Oxford, London and Gaza. We were going to discuss all their cancer patients, and then we were going out 10 days later for a week of cancer surgery. October 21st, it didn't happen. They've actually embraced real advances in cancer treatment in Gaza in the last few years, which have been destroyed now. They've just built a standalone cancer hospital, the Turkish hospital, just for cancer treatment. That's a massive move forward. It's, of course, being destroyed. This was normal Gaza that we're all used to. And this is me on the left there with Sarah Al-Sakr, a wonderful young doctor who was the first female ever to qualify as a surgeon in Gaza. And that's me operating last May, almost a year ago to the day, wondering how I'm going to do this operation with very few instruments, with it's very challenging operating out there. So that really is northern Gaza. It is normal Gaza. It's a beautiful country. It's got a beautiful coastline. They're a very happy, very, very beautiful people. Every single new doctor I've taken out there since 2010 has fallen in love with the place and wants to go back. I've got a queue of about 30 people who want to join our teams now. I have to keep saying no to them. It's a beautiful country. Top right, it might seem inappropriate showing a Gazan feast at a time when there is a famine in Gaza, but my Gazan friends, my Gazan colleagues and my Gazan family over there want people to understand what normal Gaza is like. Enas is sitting over there. Enas is our Gazan daughter, we call her. She's part of our family, and her husband Rami and daughter Sama. That's her family there. And that's us, the Oxford group, having an enormous feast. Every time I go to Gaza, my wife tells me off when I get back, because I come back overweight, or more overweight, should I say. So Gaza is a beautiful place. But then, of course, we get to October 7th, and at that stage, just to remind you, the health service was already stretched, already infrastructure problems, zero stock. So they kept running out of stuff. They never had any spare stock at all. We talked about the treatment referrals. 43% of women of childbearing age were malnourished in Gaza, much worse now. 30% of children were anemic. Multiple disabilities. I haven't talked about psychological, mental health problems. Imagine the amount of traumatic stress out there. In 2000, 14, after Operation Protective Edge, 2,000 civilians were killed in Gaza. That's been dwarfed by now. After that, they estimated 450,000 children in Gaza needed psychological support. Imagine what it's going to be like now. And of course, we've talked about the polluted water. And then the appalling events of October the 7th happened, and Gaza has been changed irrevocably since then. Now, I'm not going to bore you with lots of figures, but I'm just going to give, and you probably know these figures. These are from the UN website, Oxford website, day 238, a few days ago. The current death toll of people killed by trauma, by bombs, by gunshots, is 36,284. I believe, many believe, almost certainly a gross underestimate, but that's the figure they put out there. 82,000 injured. Look at this. I'm going to talk a lot about the direct targeting of healthcare today, because there is incontrovertible evidence that is happening, and I'm going to present some of that evidence. More than 500 healthcare workers killed in the line of duty. More than 250 healthcare workers abducted and tortured, and I'm going to talk more about that, because we have evidence for that. Multiple hospitals bombed. Less than 5 of the 36 hospitals partially functional. I think that's an overestimate. I think there's probably one hospital now which is functioning as anything above a sort of very, very basic level, and that's Al-Aqsa Hospital. Many, many thousands awaiting medical evacuation. There were a steady stream going out. That stopped completely since May the 6th. And a complete collapse of the healthcare system. I'm going to talk about excess deaths later. But I want to talk about a few individuals. And I apologise to Enas, because I know this is very upsetting, but this is a very close friend of Enas. That's our kitchen table. That's my wife sitting there. She's sitting in the front row here. You can see Enas in the far corner, and the rest of my family. Next to Enas is Maisara. Maisara was a young doctor. He was a medical student from Gaza who I taught many years ago. He got a scholarship, a Chevenix scholarship, like Enas, to get out and train in the United Kingdom. He came to King's Hospital in London. And he then went back to Gaza to work for Médecins du Monde. He was killed on November the 7th or 8th, I think it was. The Israeli army, the Israeli Air Force, bombed his house. They killed Maisara, they killed his parents, they killed his sisters. His wife happened to be out at the time, they just got married. His brothers were out at the time. His brothers came back and spent 2 days, 2 whole days, night and day, searching the rubble for their families' bodies, and they couldn't find them. After 2 days, another Israeli warplane bombed them and killed them. Now, top right-hand corner is Khaled, who works for Medical Aid for Palestinians in Gaza. He's one of a truly, truly inspirational group of people who I've known for years, who look after people like me when we go out there to help. They are a unique group of people, and Khaled is one of them. He was Maisara's best friend in Gaza, and he told me about a conversation he had with Khaled a week before Maisara was murdered. Khaled was sitting down with Maisara. Maisara told him he expected to die. They all expect to die out there. I've heard that so many times. They all think they will die, that they will be killed. And Maisara said to Khaled, I'm not frightened of dying. I know I'm going to die in this war. But what I'm frightened about is being bombed and being buried under the rubble, so I cannot have a proper religious burial. So Khaled was telling me with tears streaming down his face. That was beginning November. Maisara is still buried under the rubble. He still hasn't had a proper burial. And that tears people apart, as you can imagine, in Gaza. And this is one of many, many, many other people. And that's why that figure of 36,000 people, undoubtedly, in my view, is an underestimate. Let's talk about children. We know half the population of Gaza is children. This was about 2 months old. So we know that over 14,500 children have been killed. So, but I've seen a lot of children who died when I was out there, and I'll talk a bit about it later. That is more children that have been killed in every other conflict in the world in the last 5 years. Just think about that. Now look at this statistic. This was published in November, okay? And at that point, there were 136 children being killed every single day in Gaza. Now, I've worked out the killing rate has gone down and has averaged out at 70 children every single day have been killed in Gaza since October the 7th. Look at that graph. In Ukraine, the other war going on at the moment, 0.7 children killed per day. We can't compare conflicts, can we? But I'm going to for this sake. In Ukraine, 0.7 children killed per day. In Iraq, 0.6. Afghanistan, 2. Syria, 3 children killed per day on average. In Gaza, it's 70 children per day. There's an acronym in Gaza, which I've used in Al-Aqsa Hospital. We've all used WCNSF. Wounded child, no surviving children. Multiple thousands upon thousands of orphans out there now. Over 1,500 children have had traumatic amputations. The killing rate of civilians in Gaza is 15 times higher than it is in Ukraine. But we do not hear that, do we? So I meant to say at the beginning of this talk, I was going to give a health warning on some things in this talk, and I'm not going to apologise, but I'm just going to give you a warning. Some harrowing stories and some fairly gruesome pictures. So I don't apologise, but I'll give you a warning. But I deliberately want to talk about this because I think it's something that you all need to know that's not being talked about properly in the media. So this was an awful day in Al-Aqsa Hospital when I was working there at the beginning of January, and I'm going to talk about Ala and Aya. You can see me at the top of there treating Ala, who was a little 6-year-old boy. This is the resuscitation room of Al-Aqsa Hospital. This was the day when there were multiple bombs on Nusrat camp and El Baraj camp, and we had far too many people coming in for us to cope with. The triage process, any of you who are medics or know, triage is the prioritisation process for working out who to treat first. The triage process had collapsed, and it does collapse when you've got a handful of doctors and dozens upon dozens of desperately sick people coming in. And I discovered little Ala, 6-year-old boy, lying on the floor of the waiting area of the hospital, not having been triaged, not having been seen by anyone. And I saw immediately he was in extremis, he had terrible burns. The first thing I saw was a big hole in his chest with an open chest wound with air being sucked in and out. That is a rapidly fatal condition unless treated. He had terrible burns. We bundled up, went into the resuscitation room. There was only one trolley there. 80% of the patients we treated in the ER were on the floor because there were no trolleys. That child lying on the floor with a bandage around his head had been lying on that single trolley. We had to put him on the floor. He's on a ventilator. He's got a catastrophic fatal head injury from which he hasn't yet died. Untreatable, no chance of survival, dying a very slow death. But all we could do was put him on the floor to die slowly. His whole family has been killed, so he was alone. The bottom of the picture is Aya, who's actually the sister of the boy on the trolley. She was 8. She didn't have a fatal injury. She had a bad fractured leg, which was very displaced. When you've got a displaced fractured leg, it kinks the blood vessels. So it stops blood getting to the foot. So you need to straighten the leg rapidly in order to save that leg. This was a day we had no morphine at all in Al-Aqsa Hospital, no strong painkillers. So our orthopaedic colleague came down, had to straighten that girl's leg with no pain relief. And I can still hear in my ears the screams as that happened. 3 hours later, another load of victims, bomb victims came in, including an 8-year-old girl who had terrible burns. I didn't treat her. My friend Debbie Harrington treated her. She had burns that were so bad, you could see the bones of her face through the flesh. There was no chance of survival. She wouldn't have survived in Oxford, in London, anywhere in the world. She had fatal injuries anywhere. So all we could do was try and palliate her, try and let her die peacefully. This was the day, remember, we had no morphine in the hospital at all, so we couldn't give her any pain relief. And there was nowhere for her to die peacefully. So she was lying on the floor in the corner of the waiting area of ED, dying in agony. alone. And again, there are many examples of this. So I spent most of my time that first trip operating. So I'm a surgeon, I'm a cancer surgeon in Oxford, but I do general surgery, abdominal and chest surgery. We spent the whole time operating on appalling blast injuries to the chest and the abdomen. I've never been in a war zone before. I actually learned a lot in the first few days from the local surgeons, and then we actually helped them with a lot of the more complicated injuries. But shrapnel, often only 2 or 3 millimeters wide, can cause the most appalling damage as it goes into the abdomen and the chest, tearing through the internal organs, often very, very sick. So I'm there with Palestinians, a great friend of mine who Tayab knows as well, and we spent all our time doing that. This was a typical scene. Patient comes in extremis, bleeding to death. They're in their clothes. The clothes get dumped on the ground. We operate. There's blood all over the floor. And then the operating theatre after the case looks like that. And that was a very, very standard day in the operating theatre. But often we know there's no electricity, often no fuel. We know Al-Aqsa Hospital has run out of fuel twice in the last 2 or 3 weeks. When hospitals run out of fuel, they can't ventilate patients. And at Shifa Hospital, there are many examples of patients on ventilators dying because they couldn't be ventilated. You will have heard about the babies at Nasser Hospital who were in incubators, who died because there was no fuel to keep the incubators going. Their dead bodies were discovered rotting several weeks later. Often no theatre lights. We didn't have this problem, but I know surgeons, friends of mine, who had to operate using the light from a mobile phone sometimes. Often no drugs, often no blood products, limited surgical instruments. We often ran out of surgical gloves or surgical dressings or sterile air. I could go on and on and on. Very, very challenging circumstances. There were thousands living in Al-Aqsa Hospital. At one point in Shifa Hospital, we know in October, before it was destroyed for the first time, there were 70,000 people living in the hospital and its grounds. In Al-Aqsa Hospital, a much, much smaller hospital, there were between 20 and 30,000 living in the hospital, in the grounds, or the immediate streets round about. I've never seen crowding like that. Every single square foot had patients or their relatives. Al-Aqsa is a small hospital. It normally has about 150 patients. It had 850 patients when we were there. This is Ziki. This is a little boy who had been living in the hospital for 7 months. All his family killed. No living family at all. Al Jazeera did a mini documentary about him, they interviewed him, because he actually got used to helping the paramedics. He'd go to the ambulances when they came into the ED. He'd help transport the patients in. He used to help us with everything. We all got to know him very well. He's got no life outside, and there are many children like him. Multiple displacements, many, many orphans. Let me tell you a bit about Shifa Hospital. Shifa Hospital is was an iconic hospital. The major trauma centre, the biggest hospital in Gaza. It's older than the Israeli state. It's 78 years of age. A wonderful hospital. I've worked there, I've taught there, I've operated there. It was a truly great hospital. This is Al Shifa Hospital now. It's been completely destroyed for the second time, but completely now. When the Israeli soldiers left Shifa Hospital, they found 300 Palestinian dead civilians in the grounds of the hospital, many of them with their hands hanged up behind their back, including many healthcare workers. You may have read about Ahmed Akadmer, a very well-known, fairly junior, but a very well-known plastic surgeon in Gaza. I didn't know him well, but I met him when I was operating in Shifa Hospital last May. That's his mother, who was a physician in Al Shifa Hospital. In the last evacuation, they were asked to leave, and after that, when they left, they were both executed by the Israeli army. There are many other examples like that. What about torture? We know this is happening. On the left is Sari, an operating theatre nurse at Al-Aqsa Hospital, whom I spent every day 2 weeks working with in the operating theatre. In the middle, on the right, is Shabzi, a mate of mine from Nottingham, who was with me, an anaesthetic assistant, and he's with Highton, who didn't want his face to be shown. He's a young doctor. Both these two were kidnapped abducted by the Israeli army and imprisoned and tortured daily. Salary for 45 days, item for 62 days. They've given me very detailed testimony of exactly what happened to them. They were stripped naked. They were handcuffed and blindfolded 24 hours a day for 45 and 62 days, respectively. They were beaten every single day, sometimes for up to 12 hours at a time. Dogs with muzzles were set upon them to frighten them. Many of them died. On the right is Adnan El-Bursh, who Inas will remember well, who I only met briefly last year. He was a very well-known orthopedic surgeon in Gaza who had been abducted and imprisoned, and he died in imprisonment about 3 weeks ago. This is worth the online web addresses there at the top. Euromed Human Rights Monitor. They've taken very detailed testimonies of 100 Palestinian detainees who've been released. And they described what was happening to thousands of Palestinian civilians, because they were one of many out there, all having arbitrary detention, often for no reason at all, enforced disappearance, torture, and multiple examples of inhuman and cruel treatment, as I've described as well. So there are many, many very clear examples of that. I'm going to talk a bit about deconfliction. Deconfliction doesn't work. Deconfliction is the process which the Israelis have shown can work in the past. It's the process by which humanitarian workers, medics, healthcare workers, aid workers can come in and be protected in order to provide the aid they want to provide. And we have a system, when I say we, MAP, the local staff, about whom I spoke earlier, that magnificent group of people, every evening would be on the phone to COGAT, which is the liaison branch of the Israeli army, to be sure which roads, which hospitals, which areas were deconflicted, so that we could hopefully go safely to the hospital, work safely in the hospital, in order to do our jobs. And we get these maps every day. The red circles are where the Israeli ground forces are. The blue circles are where they aren't. You'll remember the whole of Gaza was divided up into a grid system with numbered grids. And we'd see those red circles get ever closer to where we were living and to where the hospitals were. We all know what happened to the Grand Central Kitchen. It was at night, but 3 vehicles with aid workers killed. You'll all remember that. But we witnessed as well. This is our National Hospital intensive care unit on Friday, January the 5th. We were meant to be leaving Al-Aqsa on the Sunday the 7th, but on the January the 5th, on the Friday, I was operating for about 5 hours on a young 19-year-old woman who had terrible blast injuries to her chest and abdomen. I finished operating at about 20 to 3, came out of the operating theatre to find panic throughout the whole hospital. Now, we hear bombs going off all the time there, so hearing another explosion is nothing. You hear it non-stop. What I hadn't realised was that missile attack had been on the intensive care unit, the next building to where I was operating. That was the hole in the wall from the missile attack. That led to us rapidly being evacuated from the hospital. MSF were there as well. They had to evacuate. When the foreign doctors leave, the local doctors leave as well. So that hospital overnight became disabled for about 2 weeks. It's the only hospital in Deir al-Balah. This is the house I was living in Al-Mawasi. We know Al-Mawasi, don't we? It's what the Israelis call the safe area. Well, it's not that safe, actually. We left on January the 9th. Another team from the UK, and that team went in, including friends of mine. And a week later, they were asleep in that house with some Gazan friends. And an F-16 jet bombed it, with bombs, obviously, that had come from America. The Israeli army targeted that house, which was inhabited by several foreign doctors and local Gaza workers as well. No one killed, miraculously. Injuries had to be evacuated straight away. Our government, I went and spoke to Cameron about this. Our government spoke to the Israeli government, and Cameron told me that the first response from the Israeli government was that, well, we're very sorry, but we were targeting the house next door, which was full of Hamas militants. That house is 200 meters away from the nearest building. That's why it was chosen to be a safe house. They gave subsequently 6 other excuses to why they bombed a house full of UK doctors, all of them conflicting, all of them not remotely credible. So I'm going to talk a little bit about malnutrition, and I'm going to hand over to Tayab. I've probably extended over my time, so I apologise for this. So I want to talk about famine, malnutrition, because I think this is the biggest problem affecting Gaza at the moment. We know you'll be familiar with the IPC report from a few weeks ago, designating northern Gaza as in danger of imminent famine, but also talking about middle Gaza and southern Gaza as having severe malnutrition. And it's something we highlighted when we got out of Gaza in January. We spoke about it because we could see the beginnings of it at that time. And my trip recently, and I've returned about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we saw the most appalling impact of malnutrition. I will talk a bit about that. There is a famine in northern Gaza. There's a famine imminent in middle Gaza and southern Gaza, which is clearly being exacerbated by what's happening in Rafah. It's a man-made famine. Let's not forget that. And we may be familiar with a statement from a senior UN human rights official who said very clearly starvation is being used as a method of war, which of course is the charge that the ICC, to their great credit, has laid against Netanyahu and his colleagues. And there is a wealth of evidence that has been given to the ICC and will be given to the ICC to support that charge. So, again, health warning, apologise for the pictures. They're pretty horrible, but these are the cases we had to deal with. Malnutrition is not just about losing weight. When you have had a severe injury or when you're having major surgery, malnutrition will cause this vicious cycle of events. It leads to immunosuppression. It leads to very, very poor tissue healing. So wounds don't heal. So your abdominal wound will open. That's what happened to that patient who was a patient of mine. The abdominal wall disintegrated. The intestinal repairs, the repairs of the liver, the repairs of the pancreas, the repairs of the duodenum, fall to pieces, they disintegrate. So bowel contents leak out and can't be controlled. They cause terrible infections. That increases the metabolic demand of the body, which increases the malnutrition, and you get this vicious cycle. So this is going to be becoming the major cause of death there. And again, I'm going to tell you about 2 individuals. And again, I apologise. I've got permission from Lama's family to show this photo, and indeed from her, before she died. So Tala, I haven't got any photographs of Tala. Tala was a 16-year-old female. Lama was an 18-year-old female. Both patients of mine, both had blast injuries, sustaining damage to their intestines. Both of them had very, very clearly survivable injuries if they hadn't been malnourished to start with. Both of them were extremely malnourished. Both of them died whilst we were looking after them. That's Lama there. She's very swollen, as you can see, from malnutrition. 18-year-old girl, a whole life ahead of her. That's her abdominal wound. And again, it's not very nice to look at. She had a stoma, but every hole you can see there, feces was pouring out of it. Her abdominal wound, feces was pouring out of it. Her drain sites. We had to construct these bags to try and control it. She died the day we left Gaza. A few weeks ago, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, in conjunction with Johns Hopkins, wrote a paper modelling the potential deaths in Gaza from excess deaths if the war continued, if the military assault continued. Now, we became very familiar with the term of excess deaths during COVID, didn't we? Deaths not due to trauma, then was not due to COVID. These are deaths not due to trauma, due to other things. No cancer treatment, very poor diabetes treatment, very poor kidney failure treatment, very poor infectious diseases treatment, very poor heart treatment. Malnutrition will make that all much worse. And they estimated that if there's a continuing escalation of the war, which there is because of what's happening in Rafah and the renewed assaults in northern Gaza as well, they predicted the excess deaths will get to 100,000 and might even get to 250,000, dwarfing those number of deaths we're seeing from trauma. And when I wrote this slide a few weeks ago, I said that Rafah invasion would be apocalyptic, and of course it is. This is a picture I took on May the 6th on the left as we left Rafah. We were the last people to get through the crossing before the Israeli army invaded it. They had issued an evacuation order that morning. As we drove through Rafah, you can see we saw multiple, hundreds of people leaving, not their homes, because they weren't homes. They were temporary shelters. They were tents. They were man-made tents. They were tarpaulin coverings, to which they had been displaced on many occasions already. And they were evacuating very rapidly. Cars walking on carts pulled by donkeys. On the left, you can see all the smoke. We left bombs going off all around the crossing. We were the last people to get out, then the Israeli tanks took over the crossing. And the MAP staff, those heroes I told you about earlier, I've spoken to them the day afterwards. The officials who had processed our exit at the last minute were all murdered 3 hours later by the Israeli army who went in there. You may know no Western journalists at all have been allowed into Gaza, excepting 1 or 2 appalling journalists who went in with the Israeli army to northern Gaza. We won't name them. This is Hind, who's a very well-known Gazan journalist, not quite as well-known as Motaz, who's a close friend who's left Gaza now, but Hind nevertheless. She's the cousin of Sarah al-Saka, who's a very close friend of mine. And I got to know Hind very well in my last trip. These are just excerpts from her Twitter feed since May the 6th. A new Israeli massacre as the Israeli warplanes target displaced tents in the Al-Mawasi area west of Rafah City again. Bombing tents, makeshift shelters, full of women and children. I have a live hit on Al Jazeera in the case, and all I'm thinking about is how I'll report this on this matter again. My heart is pounding so fast, my fingers are shaking, I want to cry. We are literally trapped. So, my penultimate slide. What must the world, what must we do? These are not my words, these are the words of the great Hussam Zomrot, who is the ambassador from Palestine to the UK. And Tayab and I were with him at an event 2 weeks ago. This is from his speech of that night. This is what he said the world needs to do. An immediate and permanent ceasefire. Start yesterday the process of reconstruction, rebuilding and providing humanitarian aid. Accountability. The war criminals must be held to account. And we're going to hear from Tayab about this in a minute. And sanctions, arms embargo, of course, but all those complicit companies who profit. There must be sanctions. And these are my words, but I think we all believe this. Whether we're individuals, whether we are institutions, academic institutions, healthcare institutions in the United Kingdom, whether we're government, whether we're society, we are all going to be defined by how we react to events in Gaza. So I'm going to finish by get your cameras out, QR code for MAP, donate money to you because they need it. There is incontrovertible evidence, in my view, incontrovertible evidence that healthcare facilities are being directly targeted. Incontrovertible evidence, in my view, that healthcare workers are being directly targeted, abducted, tortured, and killed. The healthcare system has been almost completely disabled, and I do not believe there are any properly functioning hospitals, and barely 1 or 2 partly functioning hospitals. And the biggest concern now is that malnutrition has already set in. This is not something that can be treated with food. This is something that needs acute inpatient medical care, and there are no acute inpatient beds left. So there'll be many, many excess deaths due to malnutrition. I apologise I've overrun, but thank you very much for listening.
Sarah, every single person. In a sense, you need a few minutes of silence and just absorb the gravity of the situation. I'm not going to say more than that. I can pass the microphone slowly. Somebody I have known for years, we've worked together many years ago, and we're about to work together again. but I just stopped talking and we just have a couple of minutes just to think. So much.
Thank you very much. Nick, thank you very much. I was with Nick a couple of weeks ago at the Bishopsgate Methodist Church, where we had a similar event to this. And in this time, the time I've been doing this job specifically on Gaza since the 7th of October, we've taken at the ICJP evidence from over 30 doctors. And there's one thing I just have to say, is can you just imagine the bravery of a human being to run into a war zone to put people back together again, like Nick and his colleagues have done. I just think we've had a moment of silence. Can we just have a round of applause for not just Nick, but the doctors that have been there. On my way here, somebody asked me, so I went to my other job before I came here, which is as a lawyer in a law firm called Finance. And somebody said to me, why are you doing this? And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, you like get 25,000 views on TikTok in your little presentations. And why do you go into a room to speak to 200 people online? And it's a good question, because I had to drag my son with me today, and he's been with me all day to his detriment. And he has to listen to what I have to say all the way in the car, all the way while I'm here. And I just want to ask a question to you. How many people in this room saw the guest house after it had been bombed on BBC News or Sky News? How many people? And how many people, if you remember, BBC News and Sky and ITV reporting Al-Shifa Hospital when the Israelis took it over, and they showed videos of what they said were weapons all over the place. And we saw their allegation, this really amazing video graphic of the tunnels underneath it. You remember that, right? How many people remember seeing the hospital after it had been bombed? Anybody? Because you haven't seen that anywhere. And this is the sad part of the reason why people like Nick and people like me have to come to places like this, because you will not hear the truth on your TV screens. You just won't see it. And you won't see the truth on social media either, because even that's suppressed. And so you have to be in events like this where Nick can say things, like he said, in very clear terms, make assertions of fact, and not be sued for it, not be in trouble for it, because it's the truth. And this is really important for you all to understand. So I'll tell you why I'm here. I'm here to give you all the tools that you need to spread the message about what's going on, what our politicians are complicit in, and what's being hidden from you. And in order to do that, you've heard the evidence from Nick about what he's seen with his own eyes, evidence that corroborates at least 30 other doctors that I've interviewed for the purposes of my war crimes investigations. But what I want to do, slightly a bit tedious for you, I'm really sorry about that, but I'm going to try my best to speak as quickly as I can in the half an hour that I have, is to give you an overview of how we got here, where we are and where we're going. And I think that's really important. And remember, we're in election season. And what I want to think about is who you're going to vote for. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I'd like you to work that out for yourself, because if you can't trust your politicians to tell you the truth about what's happening in Gaza when the evidence is so clear and obvious, how can you trust that same politician about your schools, about your NHS, about the economy, about the vulnerable in our society? Because they're not working in our interests. They're working in somebody else's interests. And that, again, is for you to work out, not for me to tell you, but it's so clear. It's so clear. I want to start by affirming that I am a lawyer, I'm a solicitor advocate, and I have a duty to uphold the constitutional principle of the rule of law and the administration of justice. And that means it's my duty as a lawyer to condemn the taking of life outside the rule of law. It doesn't matter if that life that's been taken is a Palestinian life, an Israeli life, Christian, a Muslim, or a Jew. But somewhat harder for some to understand is that includes the life of a belligerent, whether that life belongs to a Hamas member or an IDF soldier or any other party in a conflict. We have rules of war. Why do we have rules of war? It's because we as human beings consider life itself to be sacred, no matter who it belongs to. It should be an obvious human reaction to feel compelled to act to prevent harm when we see harrowing images of men, women, and children brutally killed or injured in any conflict or described in the way that Nick has. This applies equally to those that were killed in Israel and those that were killed in Palestine. Now, I start with these statements because it's incumbent on us to speak out against injustice, wherever it is and whoever the victims are. It's these principles that tell me that I would have worked to protect Jews and others from mass murder and genocide during World War II. I'm sure about that. I know that about myself because I'm doing it now. The October 7th attack in Israel was described by many as a surprise attack, a monumental failure of Israeli intelligence and security. But for many, the attack was not unexpected. It wasn't unexpected for me, it was anticipated. It came amid an ongoing failure to grapple with the dangerous situation for Palestinians in the West Bank, where Israel's government and its extreme far-right elements had escalated the brutal daily pain of occupation. Let's not forget, when we describe this war or conflict, it's not a war or conflict, it's an occupation by Israel of Palestine and the Palestinian people. The cycle of violence in Palestine and Israel is perpetuated as a result of the enduring subjugation and occupation of Palestine by Israel. An equal application of law based on race and religion. And most importantly, the exceptionalism and impunity gifted to Israel by the international community for the most serious violations of international law. When I say international community, what do I mean? I mean by human beings, our politicians that make the rules, that give this immunity. It doesn't happen because the United Kingdom, a piece of land, decided to give exception. It's because men and women decided to give exceptionalism to Israeli politicians to protect them from war crimes. The result of this collective political failure by the international community is the cause of the outburst of violence we saw on October the 7th. I'm not justifying it, I'm explaining why it happened. Israel has not only been committed to carry out a systematic human rights violations for decades, but what's it done now? It's managing this conflict to render states complicit in its violations and all of us on the brink of a massive regional war. The very formation of Israel as a Jewish state has included the displacing and erasing of the indigenous Arab presence. Mass ethnic cleansing of Palestine non-Jewish populations occurred during the Nakba between 1947 and 1949 and have continued since then. Important words, I'll say it again, continued. It wasn't just the Nakba, it's never stopped, not to this day. Israel has engaged in killings, destruction of villages and towns, looting, the mass displacement of hundreds of thousands, the denial of the right to return of expelled Palestinians. Israel's policy and treatment of Palestinians can be described as a settler colonial project through military occupation and denying the Palestinian people the right to self-determination, a right Israelis claim for themselves and will fight for. Segregation and control of Palestinians have been achieved through land confiscation, house demolitions, revoked residencies, and deportation. And in order to maintain its subjugation of Palestinians, Israel has construed Palestinians as security threats to justify their oppression and decivilization of the area. Israel has progressively turned Gaza into a highly controlled enclave. Since the 2005 evacuation of Israeli settlers, Israeli leaders have framed Gaza as a territory to be recolonized and its population as invaders that should be expelled. These claims were affirmed by Netanyahu in December 2022 as an integral to the project of consolidating the exclusive and unassailable right of the Jewish people on the Greater Israel. The acts taken to fulfill these claims are unlawful in international law. And this is the part that I want you to understand. There are three primary international institutions designed to uphold international humanitarian law: the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and more recently, the International Criminal Court. The situation in Gaza, though, has demonstrated in visceral detail the international community's lack of commitment to any real international law-based order, particularly if supporting it would in some way be against their own perceived national interests. Around the globe, world leaders condemned the actions of Hamas in Gaza for October 7th. They have unequivocally championed the right of Israel to defend itself, sending a green light to Benjamin Netanyahu and his government that he was free to reduce Gaza into rubble. They sent a clear message that there will be no consequences and complete impunity for anything that Israel did. And you've seen what Israel's done. You've seen what they're doing. Right now, today, what Nick has described is happening to people, men, women, and children. Netanyahu has been quickly pledged more military and financial aid to help his promised act of revenge. He made it clear it wasn't retribution, and so it wasn't self-defense in the beginning. He wanted vengeance. And we, as a state, along with the United States and our allies, pledged money for that vengeance. Western leaders are guilty of viewing Palestine and Israel through a prejudiced prism of merciless Palestinian terrorists against the gentle Jewish victims that are desperately maintaining the only democracy in the Middle East. They refuse to see Israel as a state carrying out acts of apartheid and engage in a brutal and belligerent occupation of an indigenous group of people. They refuse to recognize that Israel's history of belligerent occupation of Palestine, mixed with impunity, would mean that Israel was likely to take action which would be wholly disproportionate to any threat it might actually face. The risk would have been clear to politicians in the UK. And I'll tell you why it would have been clear to politicians in the UK. Because in 2009, I led a legal team for an application in a British court before a British judge under British law for an arrest warrant for former Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni for her part in alleged war crimes, killing civilians during Operation Cast Lead in Gaza in 2009. We were successful in that application. A British court granted us that arrest warrant. So it was clear to a British court what Israel was capable of doing 14 years ago. By October 2009, by October the 9th, 2024, Israel had made clear to the rest of the world what it was prepared to do now, that it had suffered 1,200 casualties on its own soil. It had threatened a response which promised disproportionate and unlawful violence against the whole population of Gaza under the controversial pretext of self-defense. And you've heard self-defense being raised by Keir Starmer, by Rishi Sunak, and almost every politician. Let's talk about self-defense. The right asserted by Israel is a right under Article 51 of the UN Charter, but it's considered as inappropriate for an occupation. The Article 51 right to self-defense is state against state self-defense. It's not state against occupied people self-defense. This is a really important thing to put back on when people say Israel is acting under self-defense. Article 51 is specifically provided to allow states to repel attacks, and even that right is only temporary until the Security Council takes action. And that any concept of self-defense must be reasonable and proportionate and cease once the immediate attack has stopped. We're way beyond any notion of self-defense, however Israel or British political allies want to frame it. Self-defense is not permission to punish or a license for vengeance. In any event, Israel was being encouraged by politicians across the globe to take whatever action it wanted in order to defend itself against Hamas, despite its track record for disproportionate attacks against Palestinians. In 2009, Operation Cast Lead saw the killing of 1,400 Palestinians, including 300 children, with over 5,000 injured. And you know what? We thought that was really bad. We thought that was really bad. In 2014, Israel killed 2,189 Palestinians, including 513 children, with over 11,000 injured. And we thought that was really bad in 2014. In 2023 and 2024, Israel has so far killed over 36,000 people, mostly women and children. You know, I knew what Israel was going to do. I spoke about it at the Labour Party conference in a speech on October the 9th. I estimated around 200,000 deaths at a minimum. And now since October the 7th, and after 6 months of military operations, Israel has absolutely destroyed Gaza. As I said, 36,000 Palestinians have been killed, including more than 14,000 children. 12,000 are presumed dead and 71,000 injured with many life-changing injuries. More children have been killed, as Nick said, in Israel's attack on Gaza since October the 7th than in all wars since the year 2000 combined. I mean, just think about that statistic. And we still pretend, our government still pretends that it's not that bad. Israel has injured hundreds of thousands and displaced over 1.5 million people. Israel has destroyed and severely damaged most of the life-sustaining infrastructure in Gaza. They have destroyed 77% of healthcare facilities, 68% of telecommunications infrastructure, large numbers of municipal services, commercial and industrial sites, almost half of all the roads, over 60% of Gaza's 439,000 homes, 68% of residential buildings, all universities, 60% of other educational facilities, including 13 libraries. Israel destroyed at least 195 heritage sites, 208 mosques, 3 churches, and Gaza's central archives, immediately wiping out 150 years of history. I don't expect you to remember the statistics, but I do want you to think about those statistics in the context of the conflicts, because you won't have heard them anywhere else. But it's happening in Gaza. And the most important thing, I'll come back to it, you won't have heard it on the BBC, on Sky News, on Channel 4. You won't have heard it in any of those places. But you know it now. You know it now. Israel has destroyed the health infrastructure, in my view, absolutely. Absolutely. It has starved the population of Gaza to the level of famine. People are literally dying of starvation at the behest of Israeli government policy and military strategy. I mean, just think about that. It's an actual strategy that we will starve people to death. To death. And they don't even pretend. Israel doesn't even pretend, because what it says to Hamas is, we will stop starving your people not when you surrender your hostages, when you give up, when you lay down your arms and when you give up. I'll tell you something, that's not true. Hamas could surrender 100 times over, and this will not stop. That's not true. And we also know, in the recent United States sort of weird gambit of pretending that Israel had put forward a peace settlement, which Israel rejected, that Hamas said, yeah, okay, sounds good. And Israel rejected it. Israel has no interest in a peace settlement at the moment. Now, I just want to talk very briefly. I don't want to give you a long law lecture. I really don't. That's a different lecture for law students. So get time, right? But I want to talk about the ICJ and the ICC. The step that has been taken by South Africa at the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is historic. It was a dangerous step for the politicians. I've been in South Africa. I was in South Africa last month, and I met the politicians and the legal teams behind this. And they're under threat. They took a huge step. They're under risk. It wasn't completely celebrated. They're worried for their lives because of the step they took. It was amazing. A global South country triggering its obligations under the Genocide Convention. And it's an amazing thing. You know what? We didn't do it in the United Kingdom. With all our values and all our rhetoric and all our support for international law, we didn't do it. The Genocide Convention is really important because not only does it act to punish genocide, it acts to prevent genocide. And let's just look at that for a moment. That means that the British government could have triggered the Genocide Convention in order to try to prevent it, and it didn't. And neither did the United States, and neither did any European country, and neither did any so-called civilized developed Western country, but South Africa, with all its problems, did. And that's a significant thing. That's a very significant thing. I want to take a moment to explain to you what genocide is. Any of the specified acts committed, I'm reading the definition because it's the quickest way to do it without boring you. Any of the specified acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. According to the crime of genocide, comprises 2 interconnected elements: the act and the intention. The specified acts defined in relation to protected groups as killing of members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. The Israelis destroyed the only IVF clinic in the whole of Gaza, and also forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Now just think about what I just said and think about what Nick told you. And you tell me if that fits into that definition, because I'll tell you it does. My legal analysis of that is that it does. The other part of the genocide act is the intention. So you've got the actions, and you've got to show that Israel intended on those things as being an attack on a part of the group or the whole group. Well, Israel is so used to impunity that it admits to it. I'm just going to give you one quote from Benjamin Netanyahu. He invoked Amalek, biblical scripture. Right? Kill every man, woman, and child, infant, Carthenox and so on. You're probably more familiar with that than I am. That is a genocidal speech. That's genocidal speech. And not only was it said by Benjamin Netanyahu, the head of state, it goes all the way down to soldiers that are saying it on the ground before they go into Gaza and attack Palestinian civilians. And as a result of the South Africa's triggering of the Genocide Convention, the ICJ found a plausible risk of irreparable prejudice to the rights of Palestinians in Gaza, a protected group under the Genocide Convention, and ordered Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent genocidal acts, prevent and punish incitement to genocide, and ensure urgent humanitarian aid. What does that mean? That means, because there's been lots of debate on our TV, we've had the ex-president of the ICJ come out and say, well, we did actually find that there was a risk of genocide. It means that what Israel was doing on the ground in Gaza presented a risk to Palestinians of genocide. Full stop. Don't let anybody else tell you anything different. That's what the ICJ has found. Because if they didn't find that, they wouldn't have ordered what's called provisional measures to make Israel stop that risk happening to Palestinians on the ground. That's really important, number one. Number two, the next thing that's happened most recently, after months and months of lobbying, months and months of pressure on Karim Khan to do the right thing as the prosecutor of the ICC, he finally lived up to his mandate and applied for arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav for very serious war crimes. The crime of starvation is included in that. The reason why I mentioned the crime of starvation is because I'm going to come back to that as work that we've done in the ICJP, where we've also lodged a complaint to Scotland Yard with regards to the crime of starvation. Now, South Africa's application to the ICJ was a monumental moment in history, as was Karim Khan's application for arrest warrants. It was a global South country risking its own standing and liberty for an oppressed nation, having recently removed the shackles of its own apartheid and oppression. It knows what that means. The current proceedings of the ICJ and ICC demonstrate something. They demonstrate an inherent weakness in the structural protections we have when rights in international humanitarian law are violated. It just doesn't work for us. It doesn't work. There is little personal cost to perpetrators for violating international law. On the contrary, what I found in my 20+ years of working in international humanitarian law is that the risk-benefit calculation is heavily weighted in the favor of committing war crimes for financial, political, and personal gain. It's woeful that maybe 80 years after the end of World War II, which saw a death toll of around, and when I say death toll, people usually think I'm going to talk about 6 million people that died in the Holocaust. I have a different figure to present to you. That is heinous. 6 million people dying in the Holocaust is heinous. I remember learning about this in school. Death toll of 75 million human beings that we killed from our own race because of World War II. 75, that's a phenomenal, mind-blowing number. And even despite that number of deaths, we have not learned our lesson. We allow genocide to repeat itself. And our governments, Western governments who created the international rules-based system, are protecting people perpetrating genocide. We don't have an independent, objectively operating instruments to put in place. We don't have them. We don't have these objective instruments that we can put in place in any practical way to protect people when their rights have been violated, even when the allegation is genocide. The UN Security Council has failed immeasurably to halt any acts that might plausibly present violations of international law. Veto after veto left the UN almost meaningless until the 25th of March. The UN Security Council voted for an immediate ceasefire and the release of all hostages. With the Security Council's power of veto is clear demonstration that the most powerful states are not prepared to work democratically, ceding their power to collectively to states, but will remain determined to put the national state interests before the interests of the international community. In any event, neither the Israelis nor Hamas have complied with the UN resolution, and the result is that we are teetering on the brink of a full war in the region and the continued deterioration of the plight of the Palestinians. But you know what? It's not, I do not trust the United Nations, I do not trust the ICC, and I do not trust the International Court of Justice. For me, I also blame myself for where we are, because it's lawyers like me that have made a fundamental mistake in the past. When we have investigated war crimes, we've only attacked the suspects of war crimes in the theatre of warfare. So what that means is we attack, for example, the soldier on the ground, the commander that gave him or her orders, and the politician that made the decision to go to war. And we left it at that. And when we failed to bring those people to justice, we thought, okay, fair enough, we tried. It was a mistake. It was a really big mistake. Because behind that theatre of war is a massive international interest-based war machine. Here in the UK, in the United States, and as I said in the opening of my presentation to you, this is not a country, a geographical land. These are human beings making a decision. These are the same kinds of people that have been killed on the screen that you saw. They have families, they have wives, they have husbands, they have children, they have mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. But they also appear to have impunity because we forgot about them. We forgot that they were potentially the absolute cause of what we're seeing happening on the ground in Gaza. And these politicians that supported the perpetration of war crimes by either providing political cover, encouraging it, or supplying weapons or military material to war criminals have not been the subject of our legal proceedings. Complicity is defined in the Rome Statute, Article 25, as aiding, abetting, and in any other way supporting the commission of a crime. And in the UK, the International Criminal Court Act allows for secondary liability, including the offence of conspiracy, which means that politicians could be liable for war crimes. Yet the UK and the US, along with others, continue to support and supply weapons and finance to Israel, rendering the decision makers personally liable to the accusation of complicity in genocide and other war crimes. My experience with the Zippy arrest warrant led me to understand that the state, no matter what its rhetoric, could not be relied on or trusted to uphold the rule of law, international law. It's for this reason that we created the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians. We try to present pathways to peace and alternatives to violence by pursuing accountability through the courts. At the ICJP, we work with the infrastructure behind the war and behind the killing in order to try to prevent it. And often because we can't prevent it, and we're not an army, and we don't have the resources of government, and so we often can't prevent it. So then what we try to do is we try to hold those that are guilty of war crimes accountable for their part in it. And this time we intend to do it with British politicians using British law, even when they're out of office. We intend to make the cost of this war personal to them until they're held accountable. In 2009, as I mentioned, I was a lead lawyer, successfully obtained the arrest warrant for Zippy Livni. Now, based on clear evidence, the court agreed there was a prosecutable case. That meant that Zippy Livni would have been arrested and taken straight to prosecution in the court. No in-between investigation was required, which gives an indication of the strength of the evidence. But you know what? The reason we failed was not because of our lack of evidence. And it wasn't because the court was corrupt or interfered, but it was because we had corrupt politicians that worked tirelessly to create a system of law to protect war criminals, including Zippy Livni and others, from prosecution in the United Kingdom. And they did that by making sure that if we applied for an arrest warrant successfully again, the Attorney General, a politician, not a judge, would have to give his consent or her consent for prosecution, which means they could protect war criminals in this country from our courts, from our own courts. It's phenomenal. But we've decided something. We've realized that protecting war criminals in this way is a war crime. And so now we can refer the Attorney General, along with the Attorney General's allies, or co-conspirators, as I like to call them, and to the ICC for prosecution. And we've seen the ICC take a big step, and so this is what we intend to do. We've already referred 5 British ministers to Scotland Yard using extraordinarily strong evidence for war crimes, including collective punishment, as well as the crime of starvation. And my analysis of the Scotland Yard response is that they're taking it seriously, in the same way as the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, and the courts took Zippy Livni's evidence seriously. So I'm wanting these politicians that we've accused of war crimes, not in Parliament, but in prison. That's the idea behind that. But just think about one thing. Had politicians not interfered with our arrest warrant process, think about what would have happened. The strength and deterrent impact of international law may have even prevented what we're seeing now, not only in Gaza, but also in the Ukraine, because international law would have meant something. So look, I don't want to take a lot of time because I think it's really important to have some questions and answers. But what I want to just go and talk to you a little bit about is a little bit of my own personal experience when I went to. So part of what we've been doing at the ICJP is collecting evidence, and we have a pipeline of around 1,800 individuals that whose evidence we want to gather, and we're at the beginning of that stage. But what that's meant is that we've had to travel at the ICJP to many, many foreign jurisdictions. So far, we've travelled to around at least 26, 30 different states, meeting heads of state, meeting ministers of justice, meeting foreign ministers, to give them the message that we need to break the shield of impunity that Israel has. And the only way we're going to ever find a solution is to apply the equal law to Palestinians and Israelis for violations of law in that jurisdiction. But I just want to explain to you. So I want to share a story with you, and it's not as powerful as Nick's, but it hopefully makes you understand why the work that we're doing is really important. I went to a refugee camp, and I can't tell you where this refugee camp was. The refugee camp was a post-October 7th refugee camp where children and some adults have been taken to be treated for very serious injuries outside of Palestine and Israel. And I spent some time at the camp assessing the evidence, soft screens that we could produce from these places, where these people have been brought for treatment. And I just want to share my personal reflection about that. And the truth is, I'll tell you what, I had to turn my Apple Watch off during Nick's speech because my heart rate monitor kept going off. And I was thinking, well, at least I've got a doctor in the house. So, I had to turn it off because it was a bit distracting, because this does affect you personally, and it really does. And I want it to affect all of you, because that's the best way that you become advocates. And when I was in this camp, I never felt so much anger and sadness at the world for what I saw it allowed to happen and continue to happen in Gaza. I met children in this camp that looked so hollow that I didn't have anything to. I went there, really big and bold, and I'm going to get all this evidence. But when I met them, I couldn't look them in the face, let alone speak to them. I really couldn't. I was ashamed of myself for being British, for being part of a state that caused them to be where they were. And I'll say that again, for being part of a state that caused them to be where they were, because we did. We're part of this. I saw kids, as Nick has described, on multiple amputated limbs. And when you see it, right, it's different to hearing about it or seeing a picture. When you see it, when you see a kid sitting in a wheelchair with 2 legs missing and an arm missing, it's different to hearing about it. And I saw these kids, but I saw this girl, and I'm really sorry for her. She was younger. I have a daughter as well. I have a 13-year-old daughter. I saw a girl, and she had scars all the way across her face, And what was really sort of moving for me was that she was asking one of the carers to brush her hair and put Mickey Mouse clips in her hair, because being pretty was still important to this child. Just think about that for a minute, right? It's the normal thing. A lot of people in this room have got daughters. She's just like one of them. Just like one of them. We sat on beanbags on like an AstroTurf football pitch, which wasn't being used for football, it was just an area. And so we sat on beanbags while I was talking to various people. And I saw this little girl come along and sit on a beanbag. She was probably about 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. And then she bounced off that beanbag into another beanbag, slowly getting closer and closer. I watched her. And then she came, and then she sat with her back to my side, just next to me like this. And I turned to her and I said, hi, do you speak English? No, I don't speak English, right? Just shy. And I asked about her. She was an orphan. She lost her parents. And it's clear she wanted to sit next to this weirdo from England that comes to speak to people because she wanted that bond. She wanted that. It's absolutely heartbreaking. I saw adults that had lost everything and they had guilt. And I'm sure Nick understands this. And the Palestinian people in the room, they had guilt for not being there, having been brought into safety. There was one guy that was asking me if I could help smuggle him back in because he had been brought out unconscious and his wife and child were still inside Gaza. I didn't meet these 2 people, but I heard about a 2-year-old with an amputated leg who still wanted to run races, and a child who lost 60 members of a family as Nick described, was a child left without family, which is the acronym that he talked about. Seeing these injuries, I've nearly finished, I'm sorry, but there's just one last bit that I want to share with you. So amongst these children, right, I met smart, and I haven't told my son this story, and I do want him to hear it. So I think it's important because we try to protect young children from this. But amongst the kids, I met this smart, good-looking, intelligent 15-year-old boy who told me, he came to me, he came hobbling over on his crutches, and he said to me, I want to be a human rights, I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. And he had serious injuries to his legs. I asked him to sit with me, and it took him a good minute to be able to bend onto the beanbag and sit down with help. And he was in pain. And then once the pain subsided, he told me a story. He said, well, my dad is a doctor, actually, and you might know him. And he's still in Gaza, working in a hospital. He said, I worry about him every day because the only time I can speak to him is when he gets to the top of the roof of the hospital and he can send me out a text message. I don't know when it's going to be. So every day I worry that he's going to be killed. He said to me that he was in a hospital when it was attacked by Israeli soldiers. He said that he had seen a person's head being crushed under the rubble. And he described it in this way. He said he saw the head change to a square shape until it gave way under the weight of the rubble. He told me that when he was in Gaza, he volunteered for human rights NGOs. But now, looking me straight in the face, he said, I don't believe in law and human rights anymore. He told me these were things for everyone else and not for Palestinians. He told me he felt abandoned by the world. At first, I didn't know what to say to him. I really didn't. I was sitting again, I thought I was embarrassed. And then I realized how strong this 15-year-old still was. You see, he was determined to make me, a foreigner to him, understand what was happening in Gaza. And honestly, he did a better job than anyone else I've met. He kept saying to me, you will never know what it's like because I lived it and you haven't. He thanked me for the work I was doing, but thought it would not make any difference whatsoever. He told me he had no hope at all. I told him after a few minutes that I saw hope. And when he asked me where, I pointed at his chest and I told him, you are the hope. You see, this was an amazing, resilient, brilliant Palestinian child who absolutely encapsulated the amazing Palestinian spirit that I've seen and Nick's described. Now, I'm determined for this boy to tell his story, and I'm going to make him an ambassador for the ICJP. I want him to become a human rights lawyer. I don't want that to be taken away from him too. So I want to thank you all for being here today and listening to us, to myself, Nick and Mike. And the final message I have for you is that we must work as a collective against tyranny. And we must hold those that violate the law accountable before it. We must come together to make this change to support and protect the institutions that we created to fulfill the most fundamental duty one human being can have to another, to protect life. Thank you.
That leaves me with a little predicament, does it not? I have got lots to say, but I'm only going to say a little, and I'm going to do it now, because I think it might not preempt, but predict the questions that are in your mind, and possibly avenues, because today was headlined as Pathways to Peace. You've got now first-hand data material from Nick, from Tayab, so I don't intend to go over that. But the question that I hope you've got on your mind, now, this probably, again, I'm going to stir up trouble, so we're in a political period. It is political. This is a political issue, a human rights issue that is political. Is there a single person here who's standing as a candidate in the general election? That's great. Can you just indicate which party?
Liberal Democrats.
Right.
Liberal Democrats.
Fine. Now, the first thing I was going to say is that it seems I live locally, so I'm very familiar with local politics as well as national. The first question is, Gaza needs to be an issue. in the election. It should not be left, I'm not saying it is entirely, to one party, the Workers' Party, to make it the only issue. It should be the issue for all the parties, and it should be a question on your lips for them. Because the question, I think, is burning across everybody's foreheads at the moment is, what can we do about it? We sitting here can do about the medical and the legal situations. And obviously, I've got very close contacts with the South African legal team, very close contacts with the ICC, the prosecutor, know extremely well, and contacts with the US. In a melting pot myself, I'm familiar with the pressures on all of them. But the beginning of a change of heart comes from you and the way in which you influence the people you might vote for, because Gaza is, in a sense, a crucible of what is going on in the world in terms of rule of law, generally. Not just in Gaza, but right here. Right here in the United Kingdom. I've written a book, I'm not afraid to advertise it tonight because it's available in the Commonwealth bookshop. And it's entitled The Power of the People, Not the People in Power. I think we've all had enough of the people in power doing what has been exposed time and again, internationally as well as nationally. Nationally, you watch it every night alongside Gaza. And you might not make the connection straight away, but it's there. Do I need to say more than post office? No. Exactly. Grenfell to come, September. COVID inquiry. And of course, infected blood. The commonality of all of those, commonality spelt out by the judge who came back with a report in infected blood, affects all levels of our society. That's not a word I've used, although I do, corrupt. Deceit, lies, throughout, at all levels, I'm afraid to say. And we've had enough of that. You've had enough of that. So that this is an opportunity to make the change that is necessary. Not another debate. We saw one, I didn't bother to watch it last night. You want to watch the same debate year after year, generation after generation? I don't think you do. You want a new caliber of representative who is reflecting what you feel and what you think, and one of the things is Gaza. Because until the British politicians face up to the initiatives taken that have just been spoken about at the ICC, because it's pressure on the ICC to do something which is coming from, particularly, not coming from governments. Look, what the Americans are trying to do is to sanction the ICC so that their officials can't travel. That's the state of our rule of law internationally. And what's the British government doing about this? When they follow the Americans over defunding a United Nations aid center and so on, UNRWA. So we've had, in a sense, puppet politicians who haven't represented us. That's why the burning question has to be, what's your position on Gaza? And of course, other things that are related to it, whether it's the supply of arms or investment or banking and so on. You know the list, it's long. What is your position as an MP? And what is even more interesting is, if you've got the time to do it, but I think the PSC are doing it for us. And I was sent, you know, if you want to know the voting record of your MP, very interesting. Well, I suggest tonight you go home. There's no Tory here tonight, but, well, there may be a Tory here, but not. And look up Jeremy Wright and his voting record. And if you have already, you know the answer. And it's pretty shocking. Pretty shocking. That tells you, of course, were you to vote them back in, what would happen in future. or somebody of the same ilk who can't answer your question at the hustings. This opportunity of almost a revolution at the ballot box, something that Tony Benn used to say, well, if voting changed anything, they'd make it illegal. So, but in a sense, we're getting close to the possibility that this time round, you can make some serious changes in the place where you live. Now, there have been changes in this area where you live, which you're familiar with over the last 2 years. So that question has to arise at the hustings in order to establish eventually, which is what the Infected Blood Inquiry was saying, and it's what the Post Office Inquiry will say, it's what Grenfell will say. The system is kaput. We do not have an effective, representative, proportionate, democratic state any longer, and it's up to us to make that difference when we vote. That's only one possibility. Now, what else can you do besides all of, you know, trying to influence the politicians who should be out there campaigning against what is happening in the Middle East? Well, the next thing you can do on a personal level, and I think this is very important, because you want to know what you can do. Having heard these two speakers, you won't want to leave here without thinking, you know, your fist is clenched. I don't mean literally, but I mean metaphorically, ready to take action. Now, a campaign which I've been part of myself, and I've supported, and I've got into a certain amount of difficulty with it in the past because it has different views of perspective upon it and regarded as being subversive. Well, it's not subversive, it's doing what it deserves to do. BDS, are you familiar with that? I'm sure you are. It's still alive and kicking, and it's still important. Boycott, divest, sanction. And what you might not have noticed was a bill that was about to go through, which was about to stop local authorities and public authorities from divesting, failed. Thank goodness. So the scene has been set again for there to be the influence which you can do. Don't buy Dead Sea products. Don't buy Israeli products. Boycott them. Don't invest in banks that invest in the, if you like, paraphernalia of oppression in the West Bank and in Gaza and in East Jerusalem. That you can make a difference, because I'll give you a small example, but it's actually quite an important one. It's happened last week. I've taken the book, I didn't bring it tonight, but I've taken the book to various literary festivals, addressing very large audiences, a bit like tonight, with the same message that I'm talking to you, I talk to them. But in relation to 3 of them, and there's more to come, a number of us, and I wasn't the first, I wasn't in the vanguard, some other authors were in the vanguard, Naomi Klein, people like that who you may have heard of. They said, we're not going to speak in. We're not coming to the literary festival. Why? Because you're sponsored by Bailey, who invest in, well, fossil fuels was one thing. The other thing that's brought up with Bailey is that they're investing in companies in Israel. It started with Hay, where I was a couple of weeks ago. Spread to Edinburgh, now Cheltenham, Financial Times, I think it's Financial Times today. They're recognizing that the whole of that area, cultural area, will have to think twice. Museums, art galleries, and so on. Please think about where you're investing your money or where you're taking money from. So these make a difference. Everybody who remembers that period in time with South Africa, the effect it had on South Africa and apartheid and so on, when the world finally took a position. The same thing can happen here with Israel, where the world, I think there's a turning point, because it's so appalling what you actually, the bit you do see on television, as well as obviously what you're hearing tonight, is such that nations are coming behind the initiative taken at the International Court of Justice, namely other nations, Nicaragua and so on. Ireland, you may have heard about Spain. They're slowly coming round to a recognition that we are in a position where at a crossroads. You're at the crossroads as I speak. Now I've been for 10 minutes, far too long. They say barristers take 4 minutes to cough when I speak. So I'm sorry you've been sitting there, and you may now have a few more minutes to ask questions. I'm going to hand the microphone over. Is that what? Oh, you've got another one. All right. Fine. Well, off we go. So, anything you want to ask of the speakers, if you'd like to address it to somebody, if it's a medical question, it's Nick. Legal, it's me. It's him. So, off you go. Somebody at the back there.
Just before we do, just before we do, if I may, I've been listening to all things going on. I just want to say this very quickly.
Well, I'd like to stand up, but it's really very much.
Don't worry, I've got the same problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm David Searle.
Yeah, I know, David.
Was in a very long mirror. And that mirror, oh, what on earth is that? It drove me crazy. No, I'm being nice to me. But when they're not found, there were dozens of me in a big boat, and I did it. I was in the mirror. But I was driving around for a particular. I missed it there.
I think
Everybody fishing, but in the sea.
I think it's David, I think it's
from that day, I thought, I went into the street in College.
Can I just interrupt? I'm going to interrupt. I'm very sorry. I don't like interrupting, but we've got limited time. I wonder if it's possible.
Yes, I'll be.
Just do a What's the question? As I'm asked that by judges all the time. What's the question?
Oh, listen to me. No one interrupts.
Please, can you shut up and let other people get in? Please.
I think in one 3 minutes or 2 minutes.
No, not 2 minutes.
Okay, I don't think we need that. If somebody got a question they can put fairly simple. Yeah, gentleman at the back of that.
David, I'll have a chat with you later. I just want to say this. For a long time, I'd go to our vigils, Justice for Palestinians vigils, and I would deliberately block out the recital of all the children's names who'd been slaughtered in Gaza because it was too painful. The other day, I decided I wasn't going to block it out anymore. I will not have my emotions dictated to me by Israel. I will not have my actions, my thoughts, my deeds, what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, dictated by Israel. That's the first step for me. This is fairly recent, and I've been fairly active before that. I'm left now thinking to myself, okay, my partner turns around to me and says to me, I'll be glad when this is over tonight, she means. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I can't turn my face away. And the point here for me is, what more can we do? What more can I do? What can I do effectively? I just want to say that to you because for me it's quite profound. I will not turn away, never. So with that, Q&A, please put your hands up. Who was first? I go here first and then just at number 2.
I have some information called the United Nations Security Council actually do anything. Can't the United Nations Security Council actually do anything in Gaza? Don't they actually have the sole mandate? I've actually read.
Yeah, I mean, there is a quick answer to that. They could, but they can't, but they don't.
Why don't they do anything? Don't they have
I can give you a quick answer to that too.
That's
for too long, it's been unreformed and it's dominated by, on the one hand, America votes one way, Russia nearly always votes the other way, and guess the United Kingdom's position. They sit on the fence and abstain, which means the Security Council are disemboweled and not empowered. But it could be because the whole system was set up to ensure, and he mentioned the Article 51 and self-defense and all the rest of it. It's set up to deal with the very situation we've got now. But because of political, basically political corruption, we've got a situation dominated by 2 major powers.
But if they actually do have a mandate to actually do something,
yeah, they do.
I don't know.
But they can't do it because they can't get the majority.
I just want to come in on that. The Security Council is dysfunctional. So as part of the visits that I've done with foreign states include Security Council members, and without revealing which countries say what, my assessment is that they are playing in the playground, not in charge of the world, and they're supposed to be protected. And so the conversations I've had is that country A is trying to embarrass and best country B, and country B is trying to embarrass and best country A. That's all they're concerned about. And the only time that will change is when we, the populations within those states, hold them accountable domestically for playing games internationally.
I want to thank you, the panel, for educating us and enlightening us in a beyond harrowing account of what's happening in Gaza from a medical perspective and the legal positions that are true. It seems that the true battle is the public opinion in the Western world, and how that will change and how that will then be the wind that will hopefully blow towards the courts and get the decisions that are so patently obvious to all of us in the room. What is your position on that? Is this a Vietnam moment back in 1968? Do you think we are getting to that, or is there a long way to travel? Thank you.
Short answer I've got, and I don't know the other two. Short answer is yes, that's where we're going. Because if it's spreading the word, which I think I said a minute ago, spreading the word is Palestinians don't need and should not be feeling that they are alone in the story you just told. And of course, there are mass rallies nearly every Saturday and a lot of local activity as well. That does get reported because they will know that there are people, the people of the world, not the politicians, the people of the world want something very different. And there are lots of elections going on in different places, not just here in the United Kingdom. So I think we are getting back to a situation in which, you know, mass movement of people began to change things as it did in Vietnam. So that's my short answer. Sorry. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the sort of solution is to hold war criminals accountable at the ballot box, so there's complicity in it. Financially, BDX is really important, and in terms of their liberty. There's no, a politician shouldn't think that if they're complicit in war crimes, they're going to walk freely on the streets of Britain or anywhere else. And these three things are our objectives of the ICJP.
Question to Nick, really. Considering you've interacted recently with David Cameron on this issue and the coming elections, how likely is it you think he's aiming to become the next Prime Minister again?
No, I think I've been very disappointed by my interaction with UK politicians, and that's probably an understatement. In fact, I spent quite a bit of time with US politicians, and they were much more constructive in their discussions, I felt, than the UK politicians. Cameron, so myself and a few others have been as well as I met up with David Cameron and Andrew Mitchell. And we went down there, I think, in retrospect, probably rather naively, thinking that they were going to listen to us. I actually took some laminated enlarged pictures and some of those gruesome things I showed you and shoved them under their noses, so there can be no doubt they have heard and seen what's going on. This was a, I told a few people recently the end result of that meeting. Initially I didn't, because we were told it was a sort of a private meeting, but I think collectively we all felt that the contract not to talk about the meeting had been destroyed when they failed to act on any of the information we've given. So I'm very happy to share that I'm not going to answer your question about whether Cameron was like that, no idea, but Andrew Mitchell spent the whole meeting on his phone, texting, scrolling through, and the subject of plausible genocide came up, and he looked up and said, any suggestion by you, wasn't actually me that brought it up, any suggestion by you that Israel is committing genocide is both hideous and appalling, I think he said. And then he got his papers together to leave. David Cameron stood up to leave and said, I've got to go to another meeting. And his final comments were, oh, and by the way, I'm really sorry you were bombed. So I think there was a period of time, maybe 2 months ago, when Cameron, his messaging was actually a lot more encouraging. But I think the last few weeks it's been appalling again. Really like. Yeah,
So-
absolutely, because I mean, you could argue if he weren't, he's had a golden opportunity to actually speak out recently, and he's failed to do that.
So my question's a legal question, really. So you were talking about taking politicians to Scotland Yard. What about dual nationality soldiers that have been fighting becoming black Korean?
So I'm not sure of the description of the work that ICJP was doing because of time not possible to be questions and answers. So the answer to your question is multiple. The collective punishment complaint which is submitted to Scotland Yard and to the ICC includes British citizens that have travelled to Israel to fight as part of the IDF. So that complaint's in place. We have a plan to prosecute privately members of British citizens that are fighting with a foreign army. We consider that to be illegal. That plan is coming. And so the answer to your question is that's being worked on. But you know what? The truth of the matter is, it shouldn't be private individual lawyers or small NGOs like mine doing this. It should be the police doing it. Scotland Yard should be doing it off their own back. But what I'd say to you is that I think as the evidence mounts, and I don't mean the information, I mean, we know what's happening, but as the evidence mounts, it's going to become much more difficult for the British police to protect British citizens that are complicit in war crimes, be they members of the British citizens and members of the IDF, and British politicians, but also you'll find tomorrow the ICJP has it's a bit of an exclusive because the embargo was midnight tonight, so hopefully I won't get into trouble for it. But we've just referred a senior Israeli official who was present in the UK has a diplomatic role with the Israeli government, carefully choosing others because he identified an individual for complicity, conspiracy in the crime of starvation, and that landed on Scotland Yard's desk today. We go comment about that tomorrow. So we are pursuing these individuals aggressively but seriously.
I just wanted to ask, you kind of glossed over the 5 individuals who preferred already. If that's because it's secret, or could it be initials, maybe do they rhyme with itchy?
Well, when we applied for his arrest warrant, when we applied for an arrest warrant, we didn't disclose that we even had applied for an arrest warrant. The task that we're engaging in is not a publicity stunt, and it really isn't. I'm not here to embarrass politicians because of their alleged.
I misspoke then. I was just curious to find them.
No. So what I mean is that if all we were interested in was drawing embarrassment to them and pointing a finger at them, I'd name them because it'd be great publicity for our organisation, for our work, for the cause. I want those people in prison, and so we're utilising proper criminal investigative procedures, which also includes that until an individual is charged, we don't name them. And so we will gladly name them once charges are brought against them, which we intend to happen.
And just a question on, in terms of a time scale, let's say everything went through around the same pace as you mentioned a case before several years ago. If everything went through on these 5 individuals at a similar kind of pace, what kind of time scale would we be looking at to see names dropped and perhaps arrests and prosecutions?
I think it's a long game. To be frank, it's a long game. The sooner the better, frankly. But I can't give you a time frame because Scotland Yard sometimes takes its time. It's very under-resourced in this area, even if they're looking at the case seriously. I can't give you a time frame, but what I can say is, as the ICC does its work, it becomes more difficult for Scotland Yard to drag its feet.
You have to bear in mind that the Met have been classified as unfit for purpose. So these are important initiatives. One's going to have to keep your eye closely on the ball if you expect them to do their job. They'll have to be shamed into doing it. That's my.
We have some questions online. Perhaps go back to the people here. John.
I think I've only had one question online, and I think it's been answered. Sorry. All right, I have had one further question just come up. Do the panel have views on how we vote for a local MP in Coventry who is vocal in supporting Palestine, but representing a party whose leader is silent on the subject?
What's the second question as well? Second question as well.
Well, the only other question was, I'm delighted to know what ICJP is doing and the ethics that drive you. Could you give a tentative timeline? What do you plan to do and by when? But I think that one has been really answered.
Far away, please, panel.
No, he's got a question.
Sorry, what do you want to do questions on the MP online?
Oh, I think, no, sorry, that one, yes.
Well, it's a very personal view, which is, you know, if there is you have to assess how genuine the affiliation is, the support for Palestine is. But I think as a major issue, you have to see what the other candidates are saying. So I wouldn't automatically say you have to vote for them unless you feel they're genuine and other people are not. That's all.
So what I'll say to you about this is that I was a member of the Labour Party until this war of conflict or escalation of occupation is the right descriptor for it. I resigned that. I was a member of the Labour Friends of Palestine Middle East. I resigned that. Under Keir Starmer, I'll be very frank. This is what I would do. I'm not telling you what to do. You have to make your own decision. While Keir Starmer is a leader of the Labour Party, I cannot vote for anybody in the Labour Party and support them. Full stop. I think it would be inappropriate for me to vote for the Conservative Party when I submitted war crimes complaints against 5 million. And so what I'm going to do in my local constituency is I'm going to look at the other candidates, the Liberal Democrats sitting in the room, the Independents, and accept them for the one that's least likely to support war crimes and genocide and vote for that person.
Oh, right.
I'll say one comment. I feel very lucky because I live in Oxford and my MP is Layla Moran, who's of Palestinian origin, and I'll very easily vote for her.
You know, I'm always offended when people call us a war.
Yes.
Ladies, who's first?
Try and keep it quick. It's not the sort of question you've been getting, but I really, every time I see what's going on in Gaza, I think, oh my God, how did you just live there? And you've been living there and going back. I just don't understand what it's like to be there. And no, you can do nothing. We know there's not much we can do. It must be sheer hell. And how do they manage to keep sane? And how do you manage to keep sane? Because it would help us to know how to keep sane out of the whole thing.
I think what impact it has on people like me and others is negligible compared to the impact on the people who live there. And I think Tayab alluded a little bit to this, or maybe it was Mike, talking about the emotions one feels. And the overriding emotion that most of us feel when we leave Gaza to come back is guilt. And that dissipates over a few weeks, but there's a very, very strong feeling of guilt. Particularly that in January, when we had to leave Al-Aqsa Hospital at very short notice, we didn't get a chance to say goodbye to our close friends, the doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers. But the living conditions are intolerable out there. But one of the many unique features about the beautiful Gazan people, and I'm looking particularly at Rami and Inas and Sama in front of us there, who are all Gazans and very beautiful people. They are the most resilient people I've ever met in my life, the most resourceful, and it is almost incredible to understand how they put up with everything they put up for so long. I'm going to tell one very quick story about a great friend of mine called Hamis, who's a doctor out there who Inas knows extremely well. He stayed in northern Gaza. I haven't seen him. I couldn't see him when I was there, but I've spoken to him on the phone. A great friend of his, I met in 2015 for the first time, and I was taken to his house, which was near a hospital called Al Wafa Hospital, which Hamis used to run, and was destroyed by the Israeli army in 2014. So yes, they've been destroying hospitals for many, many years. This is not a new phenomenon. And this chap was rebuilding his house for the 5th time. It had been bombed and destroyed 5 times, and the 5th time was in the 2014 military assault. And he was building it for the 5th time, and he was smiling and singing to himself. And he said, this is our life. This is the way of life. They won't stop me smiling. And I'll always remember that. They are remarkable people.
Put sanctions on the International Court of Justice, and they actually gave details of how this works, that it is sanctions against the judges, against anybody who gives information, who is in any way cooperative with the court. So I just wonder, what is going to happen as a result of this?
I think Karim Khan came under a lot of criticism for acting slowly, or people said that he was acting slowly, but we've got to remember that the ICC is an accountability structure. It comes into action after the event. So, if you like, it can only investigate a murder once the murder's happened, which is the ICC's role. And I understand, having supplied the ICC with evidence, the massive pressure and the massive amount of work that the ICC office had to do to get to the position they've got to now. I think Karim Khan and his team were really brave in calling out the pressure. And under Article 70 of the Rome Statute, the ICC can bring proceedings against individuals that interfere with its process, because it can effectively be a violation of the Rome Statute too. And I think we're in this end game for the ICC and for the United States order too, which is it's a legal war. Those sanctions include people like myself that are cooperating and working with the ICC. And I can only speak for myself, and I just say, bring it on. Bring it on. If you want to fight us, we'll fight back. And it's as simple as that. This is not a position where you see 36,000 people die, potentially 200,000. I give a damn about what America does. I will fight them in the courts everywhere. If you want to sanction me, I want to go to America. Great, there's plenty of other places to go on holiday. South Africa's good at the moment.
Hello, I'm back again. I'm struggling exactly how to phrase this question, but it's about the relationship between the definition, which I understand has changed recently, of the word terrorism in our
country. They changed the law on constitute terrorism, and of course the relationship to Hamas.
Is it still on? There we go. The relationship between the sort of legal definition of terrorism, the organization of Hamas, as I understand it, which is not considered a terrorist organization, is something like 2/3 of the world's countries. And we've spoken at length tonight about the way that Western countries, or the West, if you want to put it all into a group, doesn't sort of apply the rules
as they sort of
should be. And I wondered if the tag of terrorism, terrorists, is being applied appropriately, and I wanted to hear it from lawyers like yourselves, as opposed to me hearing it from somewhere on the internet or something like that. Get a proper take on it, if that's okay.
Not an easy question.
Yes, okay. Well, I'll try and deal with it in a succinct way. Namely, first of all, the definition hasn't changed. What's changed is the willingness to use that definition to embrace all sorts of fairly legitimate organisations. So that's what's changing. I haven't got it with me tonight, but there was a report 2 weeks ago. I think it's called the Mulvey report. He was a Labour MP. And what is more worrying than how the definition, I'm making a change, radical change through the use of force and so on. Whilst that hasn't changed, what is changing is attitudes towards people who protest. Now, what is really interesting in that report, fortunately, they've called the election, so it's going to fall to the ground for the moment. And what is so manifest in the report, because they actually use the word, is the word extremism is being synonymized with terrorism and the left. They don't talk about the right at all in this report. And it started with Gove and the idea that if you undermine the values of our democratic state, you're running into that category. Interesting that, because I said, well, the first group that should be in that category should be the Tory party. So, there's one only famous there. However, so it's not the definition, it is the approach that people are now taking, that various protest groups, one of them that was named as Stop Oil, they're saying that should be regarded as a terrorist organisation because of the means it uses and all the rest of it. In other words, it's using the definition that's already there to embrace a much wider public. And of course, terms that are used. I mean, I remember at the beginning of the marches, the rallies and so on, in relation to what's being described tonight, you even had, if you uttered the word Palestine, or you carried a flag for Palestine, you see where I'm going? That what they're saying basically is you stand for a proscribed, which it is proscribed here, and as you point out, not the rest of the world necessarily. Quite a lot of Western countries obviously have. But if you bear the emblems, some of you have them here tonight, about 2 to 3 months ago, you might find yourself arrested, and you might have to explain what you mean by wearing the scarf. Because the chant that's been, well, it's been around as long as I have, and that's rather a long time. From the river to the sea, even that is regarded. So I hope that gives you a flavour of the answer that we're dealing with. Is not so much definitions, but attitudes of mind towards groups and protests and the facility to protest.
Okay, I think we'll take 2 more questions and then wind up for the night. I just want to say thank you. What if people want to do? I'm going to take a straw poll. Hang on a second, hear me out. What do you want to do? Do you want to hear a few more questions, or there's 2 more questions? A few more. We'll make it so.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a comment really, but I think hopefully it follows on from what's people been talking about this election. We've been talking about this as if this election is the end of something. In other words, how you vote is the end of it. And a lot of us are going to make some very difficult decisions. Some of us have joined parties that we would never have joined before. Some of us have left parties that we wouldn't have liked to. Some of us are going to make a decision and vote for somebody that we might not have wanted to, whatever. The one thing that I do think is going to happen is a new government is going to come in. We may not have voted for them, but they probably will listen slightly more than what we've been having. So we will have power. In other words, it doesn't stop at the election. We need to hold these people to account, even if they're people we support, even if they're friends of ours, probably especially if they're friends of ours.
Agree. Comments?
it's a question for Tayab really. Jean Donoghue appeared on BBC television a month or so ago and said that the International Court of Justice had not ruled that there was a plausible risk of genocide. Instead, her words were, there was a risk of irreparable harm to the Palestinian right to be protected from genocide. Now, can you tell me what is the difference between that and the statement there is a plausible risk of genocide? And can you explain can you guess what was Jean Donoghue's intention in making this obscurification?
It's very unusual and disappointing that a judge would speak about a case she was involved in during the case's continuing proceedings. There are 17 judges that formulated this judgment of the ICJ. It's inappropriate for a single judge to interpret for everybody else what those 17 judges meant when they're still part of the proceedings. And the question you asked is, what's the difference? The truth is there is no difference. I debated with a organisation that promotes lobbies for Israel about this. And the bottom line really is that regardless of what wordplay you use, the question is, does Israeli action in Gaza risk genocide with regards to the Palestinian people? The answer to that is, whatever words you use, yes. So the front bottom line is, don't get distracted by this wordplay. I'll make it really clear. I'm quite prepared to be brought before the SRA on this issue. What Israel is doing in Gaza risks genocide, full stop. It doesn't matter what one single judge, how they interpreted that. And that's the important message. There is lots of lobbying and wordplay and distraction happening. You need to stick to the core messaging. What Israel is doing in that country constitutes evidentially war crimes.
I've got the judgment here. How long have you got? Because I've had the exact same debate, Sky Television, Sky News, Al Jazeera, and so on. And it is a nonsense. It is a scholastic, you know, that scholastic argument about how many angels can dance on the pin of the head of a needle. It's just surreal. And there are obvious questions that arise from this. And there was a letter sent last October by 600 lawyers, and I was one of them, but to sign saying, you know, predicting what is coming down the line, and also talking about genocide and so on. That has risen to 1,000, and in fact, one of them, Lord Sumption, was in the Supreme Court, and he also has poured very cold water on this whole question. Why would you bother to go to court to say, oh, I just want to know if there's a plausible right? Sorry? Right? This is kindergarten material. You don't go to court. Otherwise, I want to go to the International Court of Justice and say, excuse me, have I got a plausible right against genocide? What are they going to say? No. It's a nonsense. It's only being discussed in a real context where the right, if you like, is at risk or has already gone well beyond risk. Otherwise, the court is wasting its time talking about a scholastic or academic situation. All nations, all members of the nations themselves have the right to be protected against a plausible right, not a fanciful right, a real right to be protected against annihilation. You don't need to be much older than 7 to work that out. And you don't go and bother the court. The court has backtracked through this one judge because there's pressure all over the place. And on the ICC Guardian report about how Mossad managed to try and put pressure on the previous prosecutor. So when you read it, the word plausible is, well, about 15 times throughout the whole of the judgment. And there's no way you can say that they were talking about something that wasn't threatening. Because why do you have provisional measures? Well, we're bringing in provisional measures just in case somebody thinks about genocide. No, no, no. You only have provisional measures. The court only has the power to consider provisional measures if there is a real threat or risk. Otherwise, again, you're wasting your time. I think everybody's got the point except one or two who we've debated against.
Okay, there are some questions in the middle here. Who will bring up their hands? Thank you. I will have to stop fairly soon.
I think I have a rather extreme question. I don't understand why our current Prime Minister can't be arrested for complicity, as he is representing the British state at the moment. By any citizen could make a citizen's arrest. Surely.
Yes, but then what? The problem is you haven't got a police force who are waiting with all the evidence. So before you do an arrest, normally you have to have a dossier of evidence which you've got in preparation. It's a very sensible question. Actually, to follow up time, I forgot the name. A few years after your attempt, an Israeli officer was in fact on a plane that landed at London Airport. I was involved in it on the fringes, but he didn't get off the plane because he'd been tipped off. The police were waiting to arrest him. But I think you know a bit more about this one.
No, I mean, your question is valid. Technically speaking, if you suspect the person's committed a crime, a citizen can perform a citizen's arrest and detain that person until the police arrive. The problem really is that the impunity shield that politicians made after Zipping in 2012 means that you still need the Attorney General's consent to prosecute that individual. And so we're not wasting our resources and time running after individuals other than through the police, so that we can get to a position where they are asking the Attorney General for permission to prosecute. And if the Attorney General refuses to do that, there's a hopeful arrest warrant application waiting for him at the ICC. Well, we're trying to make it so there's no way out.
Okay, thank you. I've got one last question. Sorry, if you have further questions, they're going to stay around for a while afterwards. Please approach them.
War crimes and prosecutions. The Israeli Defense Force rarely, hardly ever convicts any of its soldiers, and this has given them a sense of impunity. What are the prospects for one of the international bodies successfully prosecuting the soldiers as well as the commanders for what's been happening?
So the way that international institutions work in war crimes investigations is more or less identical to the way the ICJP work. So if I explain the way the ICJP is working, it will give you an indication as to how the ICC is probably working. And so what you do is you lead your investigation with evidence. And so you collect the evidence. The evidence speaks to offences. You have those offences. The evidence also speaks to suspects. And so at the moment, where the ICC has got to is a same place we've got to, which we've targeted command and control responsibility of the people at the very top, giving their orders all the way down. And what you'll find happening is that it works in concentric circles. So now the ICC and the ICJP are in their second, third, fourth, and fifth round of evidence gathering, which in turn will speak to suspects in further offences. And you'll see that if the ICC is allowed to do its job properly without interference, you'll see more offences coming under the arrest warrant banner and more suspects, and probably individuals on the ground, some significant individuals. ICC is not really about arresting and prosecuting every individual. It's about significant offences with significant people. So I suspect that you'll eventually have a large list of suspects with warrants out after them with a varied list of offences. I suspect we'll end up with genocide at the ICC if the ICC is allowed to do what it's supposed to do.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'll call proceedings to a close here. I wrote this whilst I was listening to the speakers earlier on. In the face of such grinding base cruelty, there really is, or there really are no words to express the scale of the abomination. What more can we do? I'm going to leave you with that question. What more can we do? It needs doing. Having said that, get to the outro proper. So first of all, thank you so much for coming. It was our first attempt at a Pathways to Peace meeting. Not too bad. It'll be even better next time, I'm sure. So thank you very much indeed. It's an honour to be able to speak to you, really is. The next, don't worry, I won't forget. I won't forget. I've got it written down. Oh, thank God. Otherwise, I would forget. So, of course, next thing, of course, is to thank the speakers. What a wonderful panel. All of them exceptional human beings. At the back of the room earlier on, there were people crying. Says it all. Okay, so next thing, let's go to lighter things perhaps a little bit now. So thank you, as I said, to yourselves, to you in person, the people on Zoom. Future events for Justice for Palestinians. Well, we have our weekly vigils, of course. Next week on Saturday at 11 o'clock, we're in Warwick, in the marketplace. The week after that, we're back in Leamington again. It's Commonwealth next week, is it?
This week.
It's been changed around.
No, this week.
I know nothing.
This week.
This week we're in Kenilworth. Thank you. Great. Okay. Up at the top of the town by the clock tower. Thank you for putting me straight. After that, the week after that, we're in Leamington. Oh, good. I got that right. So we're outside the town hall. So that's fine. Details better than you got just now from me. Details on Facebook and Instagram pages. Or the back there on the table, there are sign-up sheets. If you're not already members, you will get a weekly email from us telling us what we're doing. So next thing is, we're showing a film fairly shortly, Israelism. Look it up if you haven't seen it. It's rather good because it shows a future for us, for our cause, that is very encouraging, with young Jews now taking the traces. Look it up. It's very good indeed. But we'll tell you more about that as well. Next Pathways to Peace is on the 18th of September. 18th September, probably here again. Hopefully, it's been worth your while coming tonight. You'll come again. And then finally, not quite finally, but next thing, perhaps the most important thing in a night, of course, is a collection. It does cost us a few pennies to put these things on. There's a bucket in the back there. If you could drop some pennies in there. Any surplus over and above our costs will go to MAP, as is always our way. There's a QR code for MAP. Yeah. So all surpluses will go to MAP. That will always be the way. So the next thing then is, yeah, so it just leaves me to say, with Palestine always on our minds, thank you, and a very good night to you all.